Hikaru might
Look at this. Bishop G4.
Oh,
He is
this
so
is insane.
This is a classic encounter taken from the most viewed online chess final in history. So on the 20th of December 22, Magnus Carlsen and Hikaru Nakamura played a tense battle that went down to the wire. Now I'll reveal the final match result at the end of this video, but first let's dive into this game. So here we see d4 played by world champion Magnus Carlsen, knight f6 from Hikaru, knight f3, pawn to d5, and now a3 played, so it gives away the opening advantage straight away because you're not fighting for the centre and you're not developing a piece. But it's blitz, there's more license. Hikaru goes e6, prepares to develop the king's bishop. Bishop f4 played, and now c5 strikes at the centre and e3 supports that pawn. The bishop develops, Magnus now takes here, and it does give Hikaru this option of taking the bishop, but he prefers to restore the material balance immediately, not leave white with that pawn, and then Magnus goes c4 here, the classic kind of queen's gambit move, so castles was played. The knight developed, Hikaru does the same, and now queen c2 is a very common square in these structures. You prepare to bring the rook to the d file, and black now activates their queen, Hikaru comes to a5, and it looks like you're walking straight into a fork with this pawn. But if you do this, there's a problem, because this pawn is actually pinned to the rook and you'd lose it, that would be the game. So no b4 on the cards, Magnus goes rook d1, Hikaru now goes rook e8, and it begs the question, well, can't you now go pawn to b4? But this time the problem is that after captures, bishop takes back, you've got problems with this knight. You'd have to defend like this, but then knight e4 piles on the pressure, or you can even start with pawn to e5 first, but it's really bad. Black's going to gain back the piece with advantage. So instead, Carlsen develops the bishop, but it should be noted the computer prefers to take this pawn, because after you do this, you're running straight into e5, which is one of the moves that rook e8 supported. Now this looks really bad for white, unless you take on d5. This is Carlsen's idea. So now if black takes, well, Carlsen takes here. Now that was actually a decent line for black, but instead Hikaru jumps the knight in, he saves it from the attack. Now he's hitting the two highlighted pieces, so that one's captured. Hikaru takes the bishop with check from the rook, so the bishop blocks, and now he drops back this bishop. It was attacked, Magnus castles, and Hikaru takes the pawn, restoring the material balance here. But it now allows Magnus to pick up this initiative. So he takes on d5, the queen recaptures, and he springs this bishop to life. The queen drops away, also defending the f7 pawn, but queen b3 now piles on the pressure there and also on that b7 pawn. But great play by Hikaru now, he wants to counter-attack. So he goes bishop to g4, leaving this whole pawn. And Magnus now plays a star move in response here. But before I show you this one, shout out to Aimchess, sponsors of today's video. So I've said it before, I'll say it again, they're a brilliant learning site that will take your game data, analyze it, and then produce a tailored training report for you. Plus, it's completely free to sign up. So if you follow the link below, you can get started, see if you like it, and then if you do want to go for all of the premium features, at that point you can get a membership and use the code EPIC at checkout to get a great discount. So give it a go, nothing to lose. Back to this one here. Magnus now plays knight to e5. So he leaves this rook hanging if Hikaru wants to take it, but he doesn't do so because now Magnus takes here with check. The king goes, and then you don't take the black queen immediately or you lose the white queen as I'm drawing here, but instead you can recapture the bishop and black's got problems. You're attacking both of these, and once the queen moves or pawn to g6, then you pick up the rook and you're doing well. So in the game we saw here, Hikaru played rook takes on e5 first. The pawn recaptured, now he picks this one up. Magnus takes back. And now a great move by Hikaru trying to decoy the pieces, pawn to b5, because you can't capture that with either piece. If you go with the queen, this is simple to understand, you lose the rook, and if you go with the bishop here, well then you run into rook b8 and it's a really uncomfortable pin. You're actually going to be losing that piece in the long run. So in the game, Magnus goes bishop to d5, hits this rook, it slides to b8 here. And now you want to intensify the pressure as white, but it's not so simple to do so. If you go e6, for example, well, black can take, we recapture, king goes, but you're not actually crashing through, and black can start worming their way out back into the game. So Magnus goes h3 instead, just create some luft for the king. And now the top move is to actually take this pawn and let white take here. But Hikaru activates his bishop, looks very logical, but Magnus can now seize an initiative. So he attacks that one, it drops back here, and it looks like it's impossible for the white queen to take this pawn, but that's exactly what Magnus does now. Because if black goes for this one, check, and then picks up the queen, well, it doesn't work because you're getting checkmated on the back rank. This is the issue. So coming back here, you can't play bishop takes on f2, and if the queen takes this pawn, well, now you're running into this tactic, check, and you pick up the queen. So what does Hikaru do? Well, he creates some space for his queen with pawn h6, but it does walk into a tactic as the eval bar is now showing. Magnus could have gone pawn e6, which he missed, but it's not an obvious tactic, because now if black takes here with check, king recaptures, rook takes, well, after you check down here, it's not checkmate and black's completely winning. But here's the trick for white. You actually take here with check, and after the king goes, well, then you check again with the bishop. And if the pawn blocks, for example, well, then you make a queen. White's doing really well. So black's best move is actually queen f5, preparing to capture here if white makes a queen. And so the best move for white is making a knight. Very complicated, I know, and you can have a line like this where now white comes out ahead, being a bishop up, should be a winnable endgame. So a bit of a complex line, but e6 was best. But in the game, we see king f1 from Magnus, stepping away from these tactics. Now the king comes to h8, and now queen e2 nudges back, defends this pawn because there's no more tactical stuff. Also offers a queen trade. Hikaru obliges and now lands the bishop on d4. Hits these two pawns. Now which one would you save? Well, Magnus makes the right choice. Pawn to b4. He wants to keep this 2-on-1 on the queen side and create a passed pawn. So Hikaru takes here, we now see rook c4, and this is an interesting moment because after the kings march in, Magnus then goes rook c6. So he could have actually done it in one tempo really, I'm not entirely clear why he didn't, but it is blitz, they're playing on very low time, look at the clocks. Rook d8 now played, attacks the bishop, it was defended, rook d7 covers the 7th, and now a great construction by Magnus. He goes rook a6, the king comes, pawn kicks on, and now he goes bishop c6, and he's preparing to just run these pawns, create a passer at the right moment. So f3 from Hikaru, he goes for counterplay, gives a pawn, but then brings the bishop around. He wants to win this one. King d3 comes back, we get this sequence, and then king d6. Pawn a4, here come the pawns, king c5, and now f4, you don't want to get the bishop trapped in, so it already looks to come out. King f3, and now g5 breaks out the bishop by force. Magnus kicks on, and after f6, he's now got a second area to attack on the board. He's in control here. King g4, bishop e5. Here comes the king. The bishop centralizes, hits the pawn, Magnus saves it, and now king b4, but now the pawn drops and the king's getting active. Rook c8 goes for counterplay down here. The king sidesteps, the rook comes anyway, and now Magnus ignores with pawn to a5, because if Hikaru captures, then you kick on, and you're forcibly creating this passed pawn. The rook has to come back and cover. This is a sample line, but after all of these come off, then you drop the f-pawn. There's big problems now, it's completely lost. So instead, we see the rook slide back to cover b6. b6 anyway, captures, pawn captures, bishop now captures. Why has Magnus given a pawn? Well, now he takes on f6. He's decoyed the bishop away. We see bishop d4 check. And now this is a really fascinating moment because you can capture the pawn with a decent game, but instead Magnus steps up the board. He'd love to come to g7, but of course the bishop covers, and after rook h8 going after this pawn, we see his idea now. So he runs this pawn, the rook takes here, then he checks, king goes, and he gives up an exchange. And it's superb judgment because now when the king sidesteps, preparing to run the pawn, well, you're using this one as a shield, there's no checks. but what a defensive resource from Hikaru here of rook h4. Now what would you play in this position to finish the game off? So if you were to go pawn f7, you just drew the game, because Hikaru can come behind, you make a queen, you chop it off, and the problem now is the black king comes around and liquidates the final pair of pawns. You can't win the endgame. So the way to do it is with bishop d7, and this is the move that Magnus finds, and Daniel reacts like this.
Look at this. Bishop g4.
Oh,
He is
this
so
is insane.
And the problem now is rook f4 is met with bishop g4. You cement that pawn and it's game over. After king e5, f7 we see resignation, because no matter what you do as black, the pawn is going through, you have to give your rook up, and then this is a one pawn end game. The king will come and win this one soon, then you'll queen the pawn, make a queen, checkmate the black king. And as for the final match score, well, you can see it on screen now. Hikaru Nakamura pipping Magnus Carlsen by just 1 point. Incredible match. If you enjoyed this one and want to see another incredible Magnus Carlsen game, then check out the video on screen. Thanks very much for watching, and see you soon.